So you just left off with going through specific pieces of the Constitution. We'd like to say that George Mason is our father of the Constitution. And as we move forward, we're going to discuss the struggle for ratification. Just because the document was signed does not mean that it actually is in effect or is going to be our governing document. The key words you really want to pay attention to as we move forward are the Anti-Federalists, the Federalists. These are going to be what people refer to as our first two political parties. The Federalist Papers, which are going to be a group of papers that the Federalists write in order to support the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, which actually ends up being a compromise to appease the Anti-Federalists. So look out for those four words as we move through this PowerPoint. So on September 17th of 1787, the Constitution is signed, but this does not mean it goes into effect. You have to ratify it. Ratifying, again, just means to put into effect. Luckily, with their new Constitution, only 9 out of 13 states actually have to ratify it. Remember, with the Articles of Confederation, one of the big problems with that document was that you had to have unanimous consent in order to make changes. And one of the huge problems there was that there were so many weaknesses. For example, the government couldn't collect taxes, which meant that they couldn't really raise an army to defend themselves, overall making the government very weak and making our nation very vulnerable to outside enemies. So changing it from having a 13 out of 13 to a 9 out of 13 has made it more possible for things to happen, for amendments to be added. Two factions occur, or opposing groups, and these are going to be your Federalists, who actually support the Constitution as it's written in 1787, and the Anti-Federalists, who actually oppose the Constitution as it's written in 1787. And these two groups are going to argue. Their main way of arguing is through newspapers, magazines, and pamphlets. The leader actually of the Anti-Federalists is Thomas Jefferson, and we'll talk about him later. But he actually starts a whole newspaper just to hate on the Constitution. It's kind of an interesting moment in history that writing really proliferates whether or not the Constitution will pass, and it really starts creating the political party system we have today. And the Constitution isn't ratified until June 21st of 1788. So these ideologies, or the ideas, the proponents that the Federalists and Anti-Federalists stand upon, the Federalists support removing some of the powers from states and giving it more to the national government. The Federalists are really afraid of the weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation. While they understand that the whole point was to avoid a tyranny, they realize that things don't get done unless there's one entity in control, and they believe that should be the national or federal government. Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, want important political powers to remain with the states. In particular, taxation is a big one. They want to make sure that only states can collect taxes. Federalists, they favor dividing power among different branches of the government. So that idea that we have three branches, you have the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, that's something the Federalists really support. Whereas the Anti-Federalists wanted the legislative branch to have more power than the executive branch. They believed that really the federal government's only job was to create laws, and that having an executive branch that has power is starting to verge on having a king. And that's something we wanted to avoid since we just broke away from a monarch. Back to the Federalist side, Federalists proposed a single person would lead the executive branch. Well, the Anti-Federalists, again, feared that. They actually proposed 3 people lead in the executive branch. And just take a second to think about that. If we had the Anti-Federalist ruling, we would have essentially 3 presidents right now, all sharing power in that executive branch. It'd be kind of interesting, and it makes me wonder if they all 3 would be from the same political party, or if we would have one from each political party. And that would be something that would be very fascinating to ponder about in the what-if game. On the last side, on the Federalists really believed that they didn't need a Bill of Rights, whereas the Anti-Federalists, one of their main arguments was that they were afraid the federal government was going to impede on states and impede on individuals. And they believed if there was a Bill of Rights, which existed, even England at this point in history has a Bill of Rights. So it's not unprecedented. So they really wanted something that really safeguarded their rights and individual rights. And we'll talk about each of those in a minute. So the Anti-Federalists are going to be led by Thomas Jefferson. They primarily include farmers and small landowners. Think about who Thomas Jefferson is. Thomas Jefferson lives in Virginia. He's a Southern boy. He owns slaves, and he's all about farms. This is why he believes the future of the nation is in agriculture. He is in agriculture. That's his lifestyle. So of course he thinks that's right and would be right for the nation. They argue actually that it's what's called illegal treason, that the Constitution actually is going beyond what it's supposed to be doing. They believe that the Constitutional Convention was meant just to amend the weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation. And instead, they ended up saying, let's scrap the articles and start all over. And Jefferson's very upset with this. He thought the articles were fairly okay and they just needed some tweaking. Again, they really are big proponents that a strong national government would destroy states' rights. They wanted to protect those as much as possible. And this is primarily because of that idea of resembling a monarchy with its concentration of power. They wanted to make sure that we avoided monarchies, spread the power out as much as possible by spreading it out to all 13 states. And they were upset because the Constitution did not have a Bill of Rights. On the other hand, the Federalists argued that the new nation is going to be most effective to handle the nation's economy if it establishes a monetary system, promotes justice, and establishes individual liberties. So we're not necessarily worried about states' rights, and we believe that if we are one collective and we have a federal government, individual liberties are still there and they won't be trampled upon. One of the big things we're going to talk about is the monetary system in particular, because it has to do with Hamilton, and that really starts to spark between Jefferson and Hamilton, really entrenching this idea of two political parties that we have today. The name Federalist is shown to link to federalism, and federalism, again, is just that divide of power between the states and the central authority, given that the central authority will outweigh the states. So if you take a piece of paper and rip it in half, the left half, the central authority, is going to be slightly bigger than the right half, which is going to be states. But when you combine them, they still fit together. Those grooves still align. They're going to work together, but central authority has a little bit more power. Leaders in this group include Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, Ben Franklin, and James Madison. And they write a series of letters or essays called the Federalist Paper in support of the Constitution. I want to take you now to Hamilton the musical. There we go. And just kind of let you listen to a little bit of this song. I am going to jump forward, but what you're going to see is Alexander Hamilton talking to Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr being in the green color, Alexander Hamilton being in the red color. Burr is kind of not on either side right now. Later on, he will become more of an anti-federalist, but as of this moment, he's kind of neutral. And so this is Hamilton pleading to Burr for help.
Burr, sir.
Well, it's the middle of the night.
Can we confer, sir?
Is this a legal matter?
Yes, and it's important to me.
What do you need?
Burr, you're a better lawyer than me.
Okay.
I know I talk too much. I'm abrasive. You're incredible in court. You're succinct, persuasive. My client needs a strong defense. You're the solution.
Who's your client?
The new U.S. Constitution?
No.
Hear me out.
No way.
A series of essays anonymously published defending the document to the public.
No one will read it.
I disagree.
And if it fails?
Burr, that's why we need it.
The Constitution's a mess.
So it needs amendments.
It's full of contradictions.
So is independence. We have to start somewhere.
No. No way.
You're making a mistake.
Good night.
Hey, what are you waiting for? What do you stall for?
What?
We won the war. What was it all for? Do you support this Constitution?
Of course.
Then defend it.
And what if you're backing the wrong horse?
Burr, we studied and we fought and we killed for the notion of a nation we now get to build. For once in your life, take a stand with pride. I don't understand how you stand to the side.
I'll keep all my...
If I could pray enough.
Alexander joins forces with James Madison and John Jay to write a series of essays defending the new United States Constitution entitled the Federalist Papers. The plan was to write a total of 25 essays, the work divided evenly among the three men. In the end, they wrote 85 essays in the span of 6 months. John Jay got sick after writing 5. James Madison wrote 29. Hamilton wrote the other 51. How do you ride like you're running out of time? Right day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time. Are you running out of time? How do you ride like tomorrow won't arrive? How do you ride like you need it to survive? How do you ride every second you're alive? Every second you're alive. Every second you're alive.
They're asking me to lead. I'm doing the best I can to get the people that I need. I'm asking you to be my right hand, man. I know.
We'll actually come back to that part in the next section. But you saw that they were going to write only 25 essays, and they were going to publish them in order to get support for the Constitution, the way it's written right now in 1787. And they call it the Federalist Paper. John Jay, Alexander, and James Madison. And of course, Alexander, he takes it on and really is the one who writes most of them. They publish under one pen name, even though later historians can look at an analysis of their handwriting and analysis of the words they use to figure out who wrote which one. But they write under the name Publius, which just means the public, meaning that it's kind of putting on the idea that it's an everyman paper and that everybody should feel this way. It's written for three reasons. One, it's in favor to vote for ratification, which means approving the Constitution. Two, it explains the Constitution for future interpretation. So it allows for a loose interpretation of the Constitution. It says that the Constitution is written for the purpose of lasting forever. It outlines how the Constitution should be set up. And lastly, again, it includes 85 letters published from October of 1787 to April of 1788. Remember that the Constitution is officially ratified in September of 1788. And you can absolutely still see these and read these articles. The arguments made by the Federalist Paper include 1 through 14 stress the importance of a union being one. 15 through 22 discuss the inadequacy of the Articles of Confederation, explaining why we had to overhaul them as opposed to just amending the Articles of Confederation. 23 through 36 explain the arguments of the type of government contained in the Constitution, explaining how it won't be a tyranny, explaining the checks and balances that are put into place, explaining why there's only one man in the executive branch instead of three men. Federalist Paper number 37 to 51 explain the Republican form of government, this idea that everyone would get a say, which we stole from the Athens, borrowed from the Athens, and we kind of transformed it. We now have a democratic republic, which means that while everyone has a say, they have a say in who represents them, as opposed to everyone getting to vote on every issue all the time. And then Federalist Paper 52 through 83 explain the three branches of government, and then 84 and 85 answer questions that have been posed about the Constitution, both from Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists, but also from the people. Remember that during this time, everyone was very close-knit, especially in the New England area. And so you could hear people arguing on the streets about whether or not we should ratify the Constitution. And so these questions were answered in the last two papers. Well, in the spirit of compromise, which we know happened a lot, especially when you think about the Great Compromise and when you think about the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Federalists agreed to add a Bill of Rights to help the document be ratified. Delaware was the first state to ratify the document on December 7th of 1787. New Hampshire was the 9th and the decisive one. Remember, you need 9 out of the 13 in order for it to be ratified. So once New Hampshire signed, we were good to go. North Carolina became the 12th state to ratify the Constitution. They approved it on November 21st of 1789. Think about that for a second, right? The document was written in 1787, and it isn't until 1789 that North Carolina gets on board. North Carolina is the second to last state to get on board with this. Rhode Island is actually the last state in 1790. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon too, because New Hampshire was the one who decided this was the 9th state, the decisive state that allowed this to be our governing document, which means once New Hampshire signed, this document ruled over North Carolina. Did North Carolina need to sign? Once the document was ratified, questions arose on how to put it into place, and it's eventually leads to growing political parties, in particular between Jefferson and Hamilton. So you're going to see the Federalist Party, which is going to be led by George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. There they are pictured right there. They believed in a strong central government. They believed in a loose interpretation of the Constitution, meaning they hoped that the Constitution would be written vaguely enough to support growth throughout centuries and centuries. And they believed the future was going to be in manufacturing and industry. Both of these men, actually take that back because George Washington's from Virginia, but Hamilton is from New York, a northern state, and so therefore he really does have that idea of manufacturing and industrialism really tied into his bones. On the other hand, you're going to have the Democratic Republicans, or also known as the Jeffersonians, and they're led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. They believe in states' rights. They want a strict interpretation of the Constitution, meaning if it is not explicitly written in the Constitution, then you shouldn't be able to do it, or it's a guaranteed right. And they believe that the future is, again, in agriculture. And then think about this, right? Jefferson is a Southern boy. He has slaves. He has a plantation. Of course, he's going to believe that agriculture is the best. So we're going to go through the last bit here, which is looking at the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are the first test of the amendments in order to pass in Article 5 of the Constitution. The article lays out there are two ways to amend this document, the Constitution. The first way is that 2/3 of both houses, so that would be the Senate and the House of Representatives, or conventions in 2/3 of the state propose the amendment. So it has to be proposed by 2/3 of one of these groups. And then 3/4 of the state legislature or a special convention in each state ratifies it. So if both houses propose it, then the states need to ratify it. And if a convention or the states propose it, then the houses need to ratify. 10 of the 12 proposed amendments were ratified on December 15th of 1791. The First Amendment, this is probably the one you all know best, are the 5 freedoms: religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. It also creates what's known as the Establishment Clause, which says that the government cannot establish an official state religion. And think about the roots of where we come from. Think about the Pilgrims and the Puritans, the Quakers. Think about how much religious diversity are in the middle colonies that have now become those middle states, and why it would be important to have an establishment clause to prohibit the government from making an official religion. And also the Free Exercise Clause, which just says a citizen can worship or not worship any way they want to choose. The next one, the Second Amendment, is the right to bear arms. This is particularly important because we have the right to defend ourselves from our government. That is specifically what the right to bear arms is about. It is not about bearing arms to kill our neighbor, but bearing arms to protect ourselves from a government who may become too powerful. The Third Amendment relates back to those quartering acts that were placed on us during colonial times, and it just says that the government cannot ask you to quarter soldiers. The Fourth Amendment protects us against searches and seizures. Police actually need a search warrant, which when you think back is like a writ of assistance back in colonial times, or probable cause in order to search. The Fifth Amendment is due process of the law. Oftentimes in a court show, you'll say, I plead the Fifth, which just means you have the right to remain silent. You have the right not to self-incriminate. It also means you have the right to double jeopardy, which means you cannot be tried for the same crime in the same court. So if you go to your local court and you have a trial for theft, for larceny of some sort, and you are told that you are not guilty, you can't be retried again in a different court system. You've already been tried for that. When you think about appeals, so let's say you were found guilty of theft, of larceny or of some sort, you can appeal it to the next higher court, which means it's not the same court system, right? You're going one step up. And then eminent domain, which is basically saying the Fifth Amendment applies to the rights of those accused of a crime. The Sixth Amendment is the right to a fair and speedy trial. a trial that includes a jury of your peers, your right to an attorney and a lawyer, your right to access your accusee or confront witnesses, and your right to testify. So these are more rights of accused. The Seventh Amendment has to do with civil trials, whereas the Eighth Amendment has to do with cruel and unusual punishments. The Ninth Amendment has to do with powers that are not listed explicitly in the Constitution, means that they belong to the people. So just because we don't say you have freedom to dress yourself, that's in the Constitution under freedom of expression. The 10th Amendment says that anything that's not listed explicitly in the Constitution belongs to the state or the people. And so that kind of covers anything that might be left out. So just kind of reviewing all 10 here, you have freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. Yes, you need to memorize those. Those are all in the First Amendment. The right to bear arms is really a controversial one today because it really means the right to bear arms against your government as opposed to the right to bear arms against your neighbor. 3 is quartering soldiers. 4 is searches and seizures. 5 is the right of persons accused of a crime. 6 are criminal issues, where 7 is civil issues. 8 is no excessive punishments. 9 is any right not explicitly said is still the right of the people. And 10 is anything not explicitly said could be a right of the state. When you have completed this PowerPoint presentation, make sure you complete pages 11 on the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, their key beliefs, and discuss the outcomes. And then make sure you find a picture and explain all 10 amendments here. Page 13 you need to do on your own. You can click this link right here to discover the difference between the powers of the national government and the powers of the state governments. This has everything to do with that 10th Amendment. Here, the powers kept to the state or to the people. So this is all about page 13, and I need you to look into that more.